I want to begin by a land acknowledgement, which is what I like to do. And I'm in right outside of Boston, Massachusetts right now in a place called Weston, and the Wampanoag Nation is the land that I'm on. And so I just call in the wisdom of the indigenous people whose land that I am on right now. And I just invite us to take a breath. So I'm going to take us back, way back. I'm going to start like 13.8 billion years ago to the Big Bang, when hydrogen started to form stars and galaxies. And then later, approximately 4.6 billion years ago, our solar system came into being. And by the way, this is an incredible fact that there are over 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. And our galaxy, the Milky Way, it contains around 30 billion planets. So that's just a little information. But now we're going to fast forward to only 4.54 billion years ago, when our Earth was formed from this solar nebula and volcanic gases. The Earth and other planets were formed. Moving forward to our earliest human ancestor is Lucy, who was found in Ethiopia 3.2 million years ago. She lived on this planet 3.2 million years ago. And then more modern human ancestors have been found in Ethiopia, dating back 300,000 years. So we've been here a long time. And the real interesting data point about all of this is that all the human fossils that have ever been found have 97% the same atoms as stars. So it is actually a scientifically known fact that we are humans, that we are made of stardust. That we are actually made 97% of stardust. And so it gives meaning to the song. And I don't know, many of you who are old enough to remember the song by one of my favorite artists, Joni Mitchell. It's called Woodstock. And the lyrics go, "We are stardust, we are golden, we are billion-year-old carbon, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden." That's Miss Joni Mitchell talking about that. We are stardust. So what does that say about who we are? And I wonder if we could understand our lives in this grander context of existence. How would we live on this planet? How would we live with each other? So I'm going to go into a personal story about myself as a child. I was basically a really happy child. I came from a really beautiful home, a loving home, one of the fortunate people. And I was, filled with the mystical sense of childhood. I loved the notion of God. I loved my Baptist church. I sang in the church, but not as a little kid, but I loved all that stuff. And at night, when I would go to bed, this is something that I never told anyone. I'm just telling this to people recently. But at night when I would go to bed, I'd lay in my bed, and not every night, but most nights, I would turn into particles. It was like I would close my eyes and I'd become particles, and I'd be above my bed. And it was at the same time both exhilarating and frightening. And so there were times when I would, summon myself back to my body, and other times when I just hang out. And that went on for many, many, many years. And it was like this secret that I had. And so at the age of 12 is when my family moved. A big move took place at the age of 12. I had been living prior to that in an all Black and Mexican neighborhood. right at the center. We were right at the intersection of Mexicans on one side and Black folks on the other side, and that's where I grew up. Well, when I was 12, we moved to an all-white town, which was just a few miles away, but really light years away in many ways. And this town, we were about the third Black family in the town. And so I went from a kid that was, I always loved school. I was good at school. I excelled, to someone that was put immediately into the classes that were the lower classes, the classes of people who didn't read as well. And so I was just automatically put into those classes. I was 12, and I was shunned, and I was ridiculed. I was terrorized at times. I was called the N-word for the first time in my life. I basically discovered racism at the age of 12. And what happened is that this bright light that I was, the light started to dim inside of me. Things shifted. Now, my mother, who was just wonderful, she did her best to comfort me. She changed that narrative. She was like, you are Black and you are beautiful and you can be the first Black female president of the United States. I don't think that's going to happen. But that's what I was told. So she tried to combat that narrative, but the majority narrative that I was getting was that I was less than. And I took all that in. It was 1968. This was 1968. That was the same year that Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. All of that was around me and my family, the grieving. And I just took it all in, and my lights just started to dim. The particles stopped as well. Fast forward to 1973, and I went to Cal Berkeley. I went to college at Berkeley, and that is where I discovered yoga and meditation. I went to my first yoga class. It was Kundalini yoga, and I did the yoga, my body, and I can't even tell you how incredible it was. It was like I came back home. Laying, after a series of asanas and laying in savasana, I just came back home to myself. And then in meditation, I found that same connection that I had before 12 years old, that it wasn't the particles, but it was the same feeling of connected to something bigger than me, to that place that's so much bigger and grander. And I tapped into my own vastness of who I am. It was incredible. I got addicted to it, of course. I went every day, every morning. I was at Kundalini, meditating and doing yoga. And it reminds me of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an African-American astrophysicist. He said this once. He said, "We are part of this universe. We are in this universe, but perhaps more important than both of those facts is that the universe is in us. The universe is in us." Somehow, I think as a kid that I tapped into that I tapped into it and I was liberated and I felt great, and it was beautiful. There was freedom in it. And then when I lost it, and then when I discovered it again in meditation, in my yoga and meditation, I knew freedom that had been in my body once before. My body had that body memory. And quickly thereafter, I developed a real samadhi practice. So this experience has actually informed my life in huge ways, because I knew that peace was possible, and I knew that liberation was possible inside of myself. I experienced a human dimension that existed outside of the construct of race that had defined me, outside of the construct of borders and limits of my body and my mind. So, but for many years, what that did is create this duality, this pulling me one way or the other. Like, so now, it's the 70s, and I had deep pride as a Black woman, my Blackness, proud of being a Black woman. And then, on the other hand, there was this incredible quiet liberation that was a part of the stardust that I am. So I struggled in this paradox, the paradox of this human form that I am taking, and this incredible tapping into the deeper, the bigger picture, the stardust. So it was later that I actually discovered Buddhism, that I became aware of Buddhism. And as I began to study Buddhism, I learned about the paradox of the two truths. And the two truths, the conventional versus the ultimate, the conventional reality versus the ultimate reality. And so I started to try to make sense of this paradox that I was holding. And you may know that different schools of Buddhism looks at the two truths in different ways. One way of looking at it is that the phenomenal world that has this provisional existence is neither real or unreal, right? And all phenomena is inherently empty. The anatta, as we know. And another way of looking at it, another school of thought, is that reality actually exists on two levels. There's the relative level, right, and the absolute level. And that the relative, this concrete world, the relative world, and the universal is empty of the concreteness and empty of inherent characteristics, and that they both exist inside of each other. That the universal exists in the relative and the relative exists in the universal. So I spent years working with that, trying to make sense of my own existence, my relative existence, living in America, Black woman, with all that came with it, being part of a culture that I was very proud of. And then this universal part of me, that this ability that I had to tap into this inner vastness, that this experience that had no race, that absolutely had no form or structure, that lived outside of all of that. And so I kept going back to Dr. Tyson's words, we are in the universe, and the universe is in us. So how should that impact our daily lives? I mean, other than on the cushion or in the yoga room, how can that inform my daily life, all of our daily lives? What would we do differently if we understood life and lived it from that place? And I really wonder if I would have been a 12-year-old whose lights were extinguished by the events of racism in America. The way I see it is that we are actually a part of an evolutionary impulse of the entire cosmos to transform from who we are and what we are to who and what we are constantly becoming. Just like the solar nebulae that created the Earth, we are constantly becoming. That this human form is a process. Nothing is static, that we are verbs instead of nouns, and that we are not the same today, who we are today as who we were yesterday. And I know that this community is fully aware of that everything is in a permanent state of impermanence. A permanent state of impermanence. That the atoms that we are made up of are composed of mainly space. That there's very little matter. And that matter really doesn't matter much because it's constantly moving and changing and transforming and appearing and disappearing. creating seemingly solid structures like humans and mountains and tables and races, and all of it seems so solid, but yet it's just phenomena rising and passing away. And that all life, as we experience it, and all phenomena inherently has built within it this state of impermanence and this state of inherent emptiness. In Pali, the words are anicca and anatta. So we are in the universe, and the universe is in us. And yet, meanwhile, in the relative world, on May 25th of this year, 2020, we all are too familiar with that video of a white police officer's knee on the throat of a Black man named George Floyd that took his life away, on a camera that for the whole world to see. But this time, the world responded unlike anything I'd ever witnessed before. For me, honestly, as much as my heart broke into pieces, it was another Black man murdered in the streets of America by a white police officer. But all of us, more fragile, more quiet, more sensitive than usual, like you probably are now after your retreat. The world had been isolated from sheltering in place, and it made us more quiet and more fragile. And we were rooting for life. And people of all nationalities and countries and skin hues took to the streets and protested and risked their lives, all calling for justice. And in some unexplained way, people were feeling interconnected to this Black man on the street of Minneapolis who was dying needlessly at the hands of racial hatred. And with America's anti-Black racism on full display, the world felt this collective suffering, and we collectively grieved. The global response was unprecedented. Over 60 countries on all 7 continents, there were protests. And I believe that the story and the worldview of separation that has underpinned our thinking and the way that we live, seeing cracks in it. This outpouring brought the world together. I believe that the coronavirus made clear to the world how deeply intertwined and interconnected we all are. And so this flagrant display of American racism's business as usual, it pried open that glimmer of connection inside our hearts that the virus had softened and made tender. The death of Mr. Floyd left many with the question, is this who we are? Is this really who we are? The ongoing racial violence that this current administration has ignited, coupled with this act of racial terror, I think was too much for many of us outside, for many of us to bear. And so we grieved. I believe many white-bodied Americans were grieving the loss of a belief that America is this fair nation, this meritocracy, a place where anyone can make it if you just try hard enough. Anyone can do it. Everyone has a fair chance. But the video of Mr. Floyd trying hard to breathe under that knee was a bitter pill of reality. And I think overwhelmed with the blatant racism of the last 4 years, many people were grieving the loss of this idea and this hope for a post-racial America. The myth of a post-racial America. I think, on the other hand, Black and brown-bodied people, they were not grieving for something lost, but they were grieving for what we never had, for the fair opportunities that we never had, for the good schools and green spaces that we never had, for the healthy food in our neighborhoods that we never had, the fair housing and good jobs, for the opportunity to just live a fulfilled life based on who you are and not the color of your skin, for the safety of our Black bodies that we never had, for the pursuit of life, liberty, and justice. Our people were grieving for the American promise we never had. But together, we were all suffering and grieving from the double pandemic of the novel coronavirus and the age-old pandemic of racism in America. And so the result is that everyone was suffering. Everyone's suffering. Black and brown bodies were dying in hospitals and in streets of America, and disproportionately at alarming rates. And we were all suffering, and we were all grieving. You know, the Buddhist teachings of the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth, that life is dukkha, right? The Buddha once said, "It is only dukkha that I describe, and the cessation of dukkha." And dukkha is often interpreted as suffering, but it's so much more than that. It's such a complex word. It actually has 3 parts to it that I want to just talk about a little bit. The first part of suffering, of dukkha, that general everyday mental, emotional, and physical pain and suffering that most people think of as suffering. It does mean that. But additionally, it points to anything that is not permanent and that is subject to change, which is, of course, all phenomena, right? All phenomena is in a state of change. Everything changes, is in a state of flux. So that includes that if dukkha, then my body that changes is dukkha. The economy is dukkha. The universe, even happiness is dukkha. It comes and it goes. It is all rising and passing away. And then the third way to look at dukkha is also that all conditioned states are dukkha. All phenomena is dependent on other phenomena. It's dependent, conditioned. It's conditioned on the other thing. Everything affects everything else and is interconnected. And of course, that gets into dependent origination, which we won't be talking about, but all of that, according to the Buddha, is dukkha. And of course, the second noble truth is the cause of dukkha, that there's a cause. And on the personal level, it's that clinging to something that is ever changing. Something that is ever changing creates dukkha for us. Trying to hold on to something that's ethereal, that slips through your hands. On the collective and the societal level, we humans, we've created causes and conditions that create great suffering for ourselves and each other. Many of the systems and institutions that we've built, we know are collapsing around us. We are facing a health, an economic, environmental, and social crisis of epic proportions. Our economic institutions at the core are financial systems that are based on extraction, excessive greed, and maximization of profits at any cost. Is currently putting under threat most everything we hold precious and sacred. Our social institutions. We've created institutions based on ideologies that places one group of people above another, creating essentially a caste system. I don't know if you're familiar, but incredible African-American woman writer Isabel Wilkerson just wrote a book called Caste. It's brilliant. And she points to the fact that in America, our caste system is based on race. So our institutions and systems are based on harmful ideology of hierarchy, racial hierarchy, gender hierarchy, heterosexual hierarchy, ableism hierarchy, and the catch-all species hierarchy, where humans are over and above all other species in the earth. But if I am in the universe and the universe is in me, then I am in Mr. Floyd and Mr. Floyd is in me. And collectively and spontaneously, somehow we tapped into that. And perhaps I think that just perhaps the upside of this coronavirus has created the conditions for people to just collectively pause, to stop everything, to be stiller than usual, to be quiet, to hear our own hearts beating, to recognize ourselves in each other, and to tap into that universe within us. And this is a perfect time for us to embrace a pathway towards repair, beginning with ourselves. How do we repair our own hearts that have been so broken? Perhaps we begin with self-forgiveness, allowing ourselves to make mistakes. And I wonder, is it possible that we can keep our hearts open as we did that week in May and the weeks that followed with the events in Minneapolis? Can we keep our hearts open in light of all the dukkha, the harm? And can we develop the capacity to put the well-being of all life on earth in the center of our collective decision-making? Can we bring wisdom and compassion into our institutions and our structures? You know, the Buddha left us with many tools, teachings on loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, many, many, many tools that you all are aware of. And I want to point to right now the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path, a prescription to alleviate dukkha. And if you boil down the Eightfold Path into, there's three different buckets. There's the morality aspect, there's the wisdom aspect, and the concentration aspect. And the morality aspect is the foundation. It's our values. Our values are at the core of who we really are. Our moral, our moral grounding. Sila is the Pali word for it, sila. Our moral compass, our moral center. It means the goodness and the ethical and honesty and integrity. Non-harming. Living in harmony with our speech and with our actions. And living in harmony with each other, with other species, and all of nature. Sila has this incredible ability to quiet our minds. And with a quiet mind, then we are able to see more clearly. You know, the Buddha said, virtuous conduct has non-remorse as its aim and non-remorse as its benefit. So I believe we humans are stardust with consciousness and with choice. And that comes with a responsibility and an accountability to all of our other sibling stardust matter in the universe. So may we use this crisis at this time to reset our hearts and our minds. May we love and honor all of the many beautiful ways that life shows up in its constantly changing nature. May we actually find our way back to the garden. You know, a dear friend of mine, who was one of my Dharma siblings, Shahara Godfrey, she passed away last week on Tuesday. She was an African-American woman, brilliant Dharma teacher, who suffered physically for so many years. And Jack Cornfield, who was my teacher and colleague and friend, who knew Shahara very well, he sent this prayer to me for her. He said, Shahara, let go into the ocean of love, the vast, timeless peace. Remember the clear light of your own true nature. We are surrounding you in love. I believe this is the stardust from whence we came. I think this is who we really are. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Konda. We'll chant the 4 vows together, and then I'll say a few words in closing.
Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are supreme. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, take heed. Do not squander your life.
So, thank you, Konda. I really appreciate the deep reminder that we're all made of stardust and the profound interconnection that represents, and also the profound sense of change that wow, that's where we come from. And that's how malleable and in flow this life is that we're in together. And I really appreciate you reminding us that in this pandemic, we're all rooting for health and for healing in a way that's kind of rare for us, that we're so conscious of the tenuous nature of this life. And we're really rooting for the health of our bodies, but also of our society. So there's this opportunity we have that you're pointing to us to take advantage of, to really shift how we greet each other, which is a powerful reminder as we come out of our Hatsu and step into our everyday lives and everyday work. So deep gratitude for joining us this evening and for your work in the world, your healing that you bring into the world every day. I want to remind everyone who's joining us that we'll have another Dharma talk next week. I'll be sharing on Wednesday evening. We also have Ease and Joy of Mornings on the 20th, which is kind of a wonderful way to step into practice if you're newer to Zen practice. If you weren't with us for Rohatsu Sesshin, which is kind of our long and deep silent retreat, Ease and Joy of Mornings is a few hours of shorter periods of sitting and of reflecting on kind of the very basics of Zen practice. So take a look at that and join us. And as always, we invite you to share generously, to give back if you're able, to Konda for sharing the Dharma with us. I believe we'll put a link in the chat box on YouTube. It's a rare thing to connect this way in the cloud together and from across the country, from Boston to Santa Fe. And I'm just really grateful tonight that I know in other times we may not have been able to be together like this, but that we were all able to share this practice. So thank you, Konda, and thank you everyone for joining.